Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala granted Dawood alayhi salam a great deal of knowledge and power, authority, wisdom, divine revelation. He also started some work on the construction of Baytul Maqdis. Some narrations mention that he had started constructing the frame of what would be the masjid of Baytul Maqdis. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him that I have not destined for you to do this work. This will be done through your son Suleiman. And so Suleiman alayhi salam comes into the picture. وَوَرِثَ دَاوُودَ سُلَيْمَانَ نِعْمَ الْعَبْدُ إِنَّهُ أَوَّابٌ. Suleiman alayhi salam became the successor of Dawood alayhi salam. And Allah Azza wa Jal gave Suleiman alayhi salam knowledge and wisdom and also gave him authority. So he was the second person to be the king and the prophet. Now from a very young age, the wisdom of Suleiman alayhi salam started becoming apparent. Decisions would be made by Dawood alayhi salam. Rulings and judgments would be made by Dawood alayhi salam. And sometimes when Suleiman alayhi salam was present, he would give his view. Or when Suleiman alayhi salam learnt of it, he would give his input into that view. And Dawood alayhi salam would give the ruling based on what his son Suleiman alayhi salam was saying. Like the example in the Quran, that there were a group of people who had a dispute, two parties. And the dispute was that one party's animals, their sheep, had gone into another party's property, their grape orchards, their vineyards, and they had eaten everything up and they had destroyed it. إِذْ نَفَشَتْ فِيهِ غَنَمُ الْقَوْمِ وَكُنَّا لِحُكْمِهِمْ شَاهِدِينَ. Dawood alayhi salam ordered them to pay for the damages that were done. The people who owned the animals, he ordered them to pay for the damages. Some narrations mention that Dawood alayhi salam ruled that these sheep now be given over to the people whose land was destroyed to compensate them for their loss. In any case, Dawood alayhi salam gave the judgment that these people need to be compensated. When Suleiman alayhi salam learned of this, he offered his input. He said, if the decision was in my hands, then I would have done this. I would have given the sheep over to the landowners, to the vineyard owners to benefit from. They could benefit from their milk. They could benefit from their offspring as long as they had them in their custody. And during this time, the people who own the sheep would have to repair the land themselves. And once the land was repaired, once the plantation was rectified and it was exactly as it was before, then these sheep would be returned back to their owners, and the people of the land would have their land, their orchard, exactly as it was before. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala liked this judgment and this ruling of Suleiman alayhi salam. He says, فَفَهَّمْنَاهَا سُلَيْمَانَ. We made Suleiman understand it. وَكُلًّا آتِينَا حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا. Even though both had authority or wisdom and both had knowledge. In another example, where there was a dispute for over a child, where two women came and each one of them claimed that the baby was theirs. So after listening to each one's version of the story, Suleiman alayhi salam said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take this baby and cut it into half, and each of you will get half, because it's your word against hers, it's her word against yours, it's not clear. I'm going to split this baby in half. So then the one who was the rightful mother of the child, she said, no, it's okay, give it to her, it's her child. I cannot let this happen. So Suleiman alayhi salam gave it to her, the one who said, because he understood that if this were to happen with anyone's child, a true mother might sacrifice her custody of the child, but she would never sacrifice the life of the child. And so when the woman said this, and said, no, give it to her. He understood that this is the real mother. She does not want anything to happen to her child. So Suleiman alayhi salam now takes over the legacy of Dawood alayhi salam. He is the king, and he engages very, very actively in the construction of Baytul Maqdis. The Quran describes this, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala supported Suleiman alayhi salam by giving him not only the control and the ability to speak with animals, but he also gave him control over the jinns. And these jinns, يَعْمَلُونَ لَهُ مَا يَشَاءُ مِن مَحَارِيبَ وَتَمَاثِيلَ وَجِفَانٍ كَالْجَوَابِ وَقُدُورِ الرَّاسِيَاتِ. They would construct structures. Maharib refers to structures, specifically the structures for worship, so the various parts of the masjid, aspect of Al-Masjid Al-Aqsa. Tamathil, monuments of different types. Jifanin kal jawab, massive cauldrons possibly for the sake of feeding people. These were like small valleys. They were so big, it was like it could hold the amount that a valley could hold. And وَقُدُورِ الرَّاسِيَاتِ, this also refers to cauldrons. Some people have said that jifanin kal jawab refers to large fountains and large reservoirs to hold water. And those reservoirs were so large that they were the size of valleys. And the cauldrons were for the sake of feeding all his armies and the various creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Suleiman alayhi salam has some jinns that are doing other tasks for him as well. وَالشَّيَاطِينَ كُلَّ بَنَّاءٍ وَغَوَّاصٍ وَآخَرِينَ مُقَرَّرِينَ فِي الْأَصْفَادِ. So there were those who were working for him willingly, and these would be given responsibilities of construction. Other jinns would be given responsibility to plunge into the depths of the waters of the oceans and search for jewels, pearls. And then there were some jinns that were not compliant. So he had these ones chained up. Another very interesting turn of events occurred in the time of Suleiman alayhi salam, related to jinns. People had started using jinns to find out news of the unseen. Soothsayers and fortune tellers would try to get the jinns to go and listen to the decisions that were being passed down in the heavens. The jinns would hear a word here or there and come back and tell the fortune tellers. The fortune tellers would add a story to it and relay it as if they had knowledge of the unseen. Similarly, magic and sorcery became predominant at that time. And people started viewing magicians and sorcerers as sacred personalities, as holy people, as people that had a great deal of power and authority, and in some ways they felt that they were even more authoritative than the prophets ﷺ. They thought that through these jinns we can get a lot of things done, and most of the time those things that they wanted to get done were harmful and hurtful. To break up someone's marriage, to hurt someone, to cause some kind of damage to someone. Suleiman alayhi salam took very aggressive steps against this, and wherever there were magical spells that were being created and formed or performed, he had all of those confiscated and he had them buried. So a lot of the jinns weren't very happy with him. The sorcerers did not like him. But these were steps that Suleiman alayhi salam took to remove this element from society. There is a very lengthy discussion to be had in relation to magic and sorcery, its ahkam. Does it even exist? What are its various types? How is it practiced? And how does one protect oneself from? There's a whole discussion about that. But we are talking about Suleiman alayhi salam's role as the ultimate administrator and ruler of that land, these are some of the things that he had to look after. And you will find wherever the story of Suleiman alayhi salam is mentioned in the Quran, there will be some mention of jinns there. So he had control over jinns. He put an end to the mischievous jinns. He had a lot of them tied up or chained up. And of course there is the famous story of Suleiman alayhi salam and Bilqis. Now I mentioned in the beginning of this series that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given Suleiman alayhi salam power over the winds. And these winds would help him travel over a distance that it would take a month to cover. He would cover that in just one morning or one evening. Now, in the books of tafsir, it's mentioned that he would travel from Damascus all the way to Istakhar, which is in Persia. He would travel to Kabul. All of this would be happening in one day. His movements would be very swift. Some mufassirin, like Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah, say that this gift of having control over the wind was given to him when he made a particular sacrifice. What was that sacrifice? One day, while he was out inspecting the horses of his army, and he was going through, he was checking them, inspecting them, the time of Asr almost ended. And so he was very upset, and he said that my attachment to these horses, or the attention that I was giving to these horses, distracted me from my duty to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so فَطَفِقَ مَسْحًا بِالسُّوقِ وَالْأَعْنَاقِ. Now the word mash is used in the Quran. Many mufassirin, including Ibn Kathir, say that he actually had those animals slaughtered. He started wiping the blades over their necks and over their legs. Other mufassirin, like Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, hold the view that no, he did not actually slaughter those horses. Rather, he had made them run and gallop for him. He was checking their strength and their speed. And so all of these horses, which were in the thousands, they had broken out into a sweat. So he went back, he looked after them, and he thanked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the mash here is having them wiped down after that extensive exercise. Ibn Kathir rahimahullah says that no, they were in fact slaughtered by Suleiman alayhi salam as a display of his regret and remorse for becoming distracted from salat for that time. And so anything that came between him and his salat, he wanted to show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he was ready to sacrifice it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he did this, Allah azza wa jal gave him control over the winds. And yes, as we mentioned, the winds would take him sometimes from wherever he was, they would bring him right back to Bayt al-Maqdis. The famous story between Suleiman alayhi salam and Bilqis, the queen of Saba. This is a lengthy story, we will not get into it, but it does give us some glimpses of Suleiman alayhi salam's rulership and the way he ran his kingdom. It was not limited. It tells us that Suleiman alayhi salam's rule was not limited to just Bayt al-Maqdis, Ash-Sham, but rather he had reign over other lands as well. And the fact that the queen of Saba came from Yemen to submit to Suleiman alayhi salam, and all of the miracles and miraculous events that happened during this incident, whether it is the hudhud who comes and conveys the messages and delivers the letter of Suleiman alayhi salam, or it is the bringing of the massive throne of Bilqis over to Suleiman alayhi salam, or it's the construction of a palace that is entirely made out of glass, which dazzles and startles Bilqis, or it's the fact that she submits to Suleiman alayhi salam along with all her people. All of this gives us insight into what kind of ruler Suleiman alayhi salatu wasalam was. It is obvious and apparent that with such an extensive kingdom, he was doing a lot of things. He was carrying on that legacy of Dawood alayhi salam, which not only enabled him to secure the rule and order over those parts of the world, but also he used it as a means of conveying the message of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and bringing people to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.